All right, I got a lot of questions this week, and I really appreciate that because oftentimes I learn as much as anyone else that might be watching. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll always do my best to answer them. All right, the first one here is from Beebin Baby 5138, and he's asking, how do I find out the flash battery charge? And this is for the Godox TT350 flash. All right, on the TT350, the battery indicator is up here on the top right. And this only comes on when the batteries are already low. You'll see a little battery icon here blinking. And it doesn't have like the normal battery indicators where you have like 3 bars, 2 bars, 1 bar. It simply comes on when the batteries are low. So as soon as you see this, you need to change your batteries as soon as possible. Actually, a good indication of battery life is when your recycle times are taking longer and longer before the flash fires again. When you sense that, check your battery indicator to see if it's low, and then you definitely need to change your batteries. Okay, the next question here is from Mark, and he says, I've seen it mentioned that in playback, the option on where you see highlight shadow display have changed. If that is correct, could you please go over that one day? Okay, so Mark is referring to the Olympus OM1, where the menu has changed and it actually no longer has the highlight shadow option like the previous models, for example, the EM5 Mark III. So let me just show you real quick the difference, and then the highlight shadow indicators are actually still in the OM1, but they're on a different screen. All right, in the old menu system, you would just go into the menu, go into the D menu, go over here to Info Settings, and then Info Settings for Playback. Click over to the right, and then you would select the kind of information that you can toggle through. So let's select a histogram and highlight shadow, for example. Now let's show an image. So right now we're just seeing the image with some basic information like time and date. And we click the info button, it'll toggle to the overall information, showing you all the exposure information, but you'll also notice that the highlight and shadow areas are already blinking, but this is not the highlight shadow option. If we click info again, there's our histogram. We'll toggle again. This is actually the highlight shadow page where the blue indicates we're clipping to black and the red blinking here indicates we're clipped to white. And it also says highlight shadow here. So let's go back into the menu and go into the info information, and we'll just turn highlight shadow off. Now if I push play, we have our image here with the basic time and date. Click info. We have our overall information, which includes highlight shadow clipping. Click info again. There's our histogram. We click info again, and we're back to our normal view here. So you can see that the highlight shadow page is actually missing. So there was actually a full screen highlight shadow information in playback on the previous menu system. All right, let's go over to the OM1. And this is our overall information showing all the exposure information. And actually in this tiny preview here, thumbnail, there is highlight shadow information. I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of red blinking on the top of her head there. But that's where it is on the OM1, just like it was on the EM5 Mark III. However, if we go into the menu and go over here to the playback menu and go to page 3, info settings, and then click OK on this, you'll notice that we don't have highlight shadow information anymore. We have image only, we have basic, and I can't read that, overall. So that's what we have now, is the overall information. So let's go ahead and see what we have now. So if I click the play menu, here's the overall information. Click the info button. This is the image only. Click the info button. This is the basic info here with time and date. And then we're back to the overall. So the highlight shadow page is gone. If you want to see highlight shadow clipping, you're going to have to look at the overall information. So as far as I can tell, the full screen highlight and shadow option is gone. I couldn't find it anywhere. Seems like it'd be an easy enough thing to add in firmware. So if omsystems, if you're watching, please do that for the next firmware update, because I think actually a lot of people like that feature that was in the previous menu system. All right, the next question here is from Robin Barnes, and it says, "Hi Rob, I'm aware that in CAF with Bird ID, the focus box should turn green. Mine doesn't. It simply blinks green spots. What can I do to achieve the green box effect? All right, so I think what you're saying is that we have bird detect on, and when you focus on the bird, you're getting all these floating green dots all around. So all you need to do actually is go into the menu, go into the autofocus menu, go on to page 2 and AF area pointer. You probably have this set to on 2. Just change this to on 1. And now when you focus on the bird, sometimes you'll get a single green dot, and that means that the autofocus has actually detected the head or the eye of the bird. If it hasn't detected that, you'll get a green box that encompasses the entire white area there, like that right there. Hopefully you saw that. As soon as it gets a lock on possibly the head or the face, you'll get a small green dot to let you know that it found the eye. Then of course you can turn all that off completely, like this. All right, so hopefully that answers your question. If not, just let me know and I'll try again. But this next question here is from Peter. And he says, with my OM5, I use manual exposure with auto ISO. In this mode, my exposure meter always says -1.3. Now, I'm totally happy with my images, but have I set up something wrong in my settings? All right, so I think what you're talking about is, here's your exposure meter here. And then next to it, it says -1.3. But obviously, the exposure meter is actually reading more than 3 stops underexposed, but the number next to it says -1.3. This is actually your exposure compensation number, because when you're in auto ISO, you have the ability to do exposure compensation. And if you want to change this, I think by default, and this should be the same on the OM5, this is my EM5 Mark III, you just push and hold the exposure compensation button right here. So let me do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push and hold this, and you'll notice that the -1.3 is now in yellow, and then I can rotate the rear dial and bring back the 0 or dial in, positive exposure comp, or dial in even more negative exposure comp, and you can go up to plus or minus 5 stops with exposure comp in manual mode. And then when I let go, I'm back to normal mode, and now my front and rear dials operate the shutter speed and aperture again. Now, like I said before, this button here should be by default the exposure compensation button. Now, if you short press it like that, you're actually going to see up and down arrows over your shutter speed and aperture. So if you short press it, depending on how you have your D-pad set up, you can now control shutter speed and aperture by pushing up and down for shutter speed and left and right for aperture, and then short press it again to take you back out. But let's go into the menu and make sure that that button is set. And you can program any button to exposure compensation, but just by default, we'll go into the custom menu here, go into menu B, button function, click OK here. And as you can see, I have mine set up by default, the exposure comp. But you can set just about any of the other buttons to do that. Now, another way to access the exposure compensation quickly, rather than pushing and holding this function button up here, you can do it with the function lever button and just rotate a dial. So basically just go into the menu and go into the B or button menu again, and then go down here to function lever function and set this to mode 1, where it says change the dial functions. There's mode 2, which changes the AF target point. Some people prefer that. Then mode 3, which just puts it into video mode. But if you put this into mode 1 and then go up to dial function, click OK here, and then go down here to manual and bulb mode, click over to the right, you can see that in function lever position 1 is set the shutter speed and F number, or your aperture. But in position 2, is set to ISO and exposure compensation. So when I flip the lever, the dials now become ISO and exposure comp. So right now we're in shutter speed and aperture for the dials. I'm going to flip this, and now I can quickly adjust the exposure compensation. But the rear dial now adjusts the ISO, and that's going to take you out of auto ISO. And you'll notice that the exposure meter is now reading the same as the exposure scale here. So let's put this back into auto ISO. And now we're back into exposure compensation. So what I recommend you do is go into the menu, and for button function, manual and bulb mode, click the info button and turn off this dial so you don't have that kind of confusion, right? So now when I rotate the rear dial, it doesn't do anything. I'm only going to change exposure compensation and not inadvertently kick myself out of auto ISO. So that's probably the best way to use that. So you're doing your normal manual mode and adjusting shutter speed and aperture, then quickly flip over here if you want to change exposure comp, then flip back. I hope that answered your question and gave you a couple ideas on how to control exposure compensation either through function buttons or using the function lever. And for everyone watching, if you find these videos helpful, you can support my channel by buying me a coffee or making a small donation in the links below. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.